Hi, Kaylee. Nice to meet you. Sorry, hold on. Let me just like. Hi, Kaylee. Nice to meet you. We met. Nice to meet you. Thanks, Stubbs. How do you do this, sir? Anybody? Janice? Whatever you think would be best. I mean, I talk really loud, so. Thanks.
are really honored to have a fantastic panel here tonight. Before we get started, I want to thank people that helped make this possible. LA Film School has been generous to give us their space. Also like to thank Dread Central, who is hosting the live stream on their front page, and Screencraft, which is an organization that I started with my partner Cameron, who's somewhere here, has put this together as well, so big hand for Screencraft. And a really shameless plug, I'd like to say that our horror screenplay contest is accepting submissions until tomorrow's the last full day for submitting. June 1st is the deadline. So if you happen to have one like in your back pocket that you've been itching to submit to a contest, now you have one. We have some fantastic prizes. Kaylee Marsh is also going to be a judge on the panel with some other studio judges. And yeah. Kaylee Marsh, so that's a great segue, is going to be moderating our panel tonight. Heather, at the last minute, could not join. Heather is a journalist at Dread Central, and she had strep throat and couldn't really talk, which is a necessary prerequisite for moderating a panel. We're really honored to have Kaylee. She is the founder of The Blood List, which is the annual list of top 13 most liked dark genre screenplays every year, as voted on by 75 industry insiders. If you don't know what the Blood List is, look it up. There's been a lot of fantastic films that have been recognized on it. And she is also a producer and manager at Station 3. She recently sold a pitch to Comedy Central and has some exciting projects in the works that can't talk about quite yet. We are really honored to have her step in at the last minute as moderator of the panel, and hopefully she gives our panelists a real hard time. Our panelists are Andrew Wilson, who's one of the top literary managers at Zero Gravity. Andrew represents such legendary horror directors as Tobe Hooper of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Clive Barker, writer and legendary horror creator of Candyman and Hellraiser, among many others. We have Adam Simon, who's a writer-director, known for The Haunting in Connecticut, which he sold to Lionsgate, which went on to gross $77 million worldwide. He also directed the documentary American Nightmare, as well as such classics as the Roger Corman films Carnosaur and Brain Dead. We are happy to have Adam join us. He's second time he's joined one of our panels, and really happy to have him again. Misha Green is joining us. She's a rising star in the world of Hollywood TV and film screenwriting. She has written for Spartacus, Sons of Anarchy, and Heroes, among many others. She has sold spec screenplays all over town. Mickey Keating is an exciting newcomer who wrote and directed Ritual, which was just picked up for distribution by After Dark Films and Lionsgate. It's going to be released soon, so keep your eyes out for that. He currently works at Blumhouse Productions, producers of Paranormal Activity, Sinister, and Insidious. We also have Drew Daywalt joining us. Drew cut his teeth as a studio screenwriter and began his career with such luminaries as Tony Scott, Quentin Tarantino, and Lawrence Bender. After years of script doctoring and for studio action movies and comedies, he went on to do his first cinematic love, horror, and he's done stuff for MTV and several independent films as well. He has he wrote, I believe, the remake of the cult classic Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. He's doing a remake for Tom Savini and Anchor Bay and Fangoria, so keep your eyes out for that as well. Jimmy Lowery is also joining us. At the last minute, we were able to get him. He was born and raised in Los Angeles. His directorial debut was just picked up by Cinedigm. It's a low-budget horror film. I've just seen the trailer for it, and it looks fantastic. It's going to be released July 5th. So look for that as well. And they're starting some really creative viral marketing online now, which you may or may not have seen. So keep your eyes open for some really creative entrepreneurial marketing. These guys are doing some really exciting stuff with the internet right now. And that does it. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Kaylee Marsh to moderate our panel. And you guys welcome to take your seats. Thank you.
Oh, wait, actually, where is the awesome guy that fixed this for me earlier? Can you pull it up? I don't want to mess it up. Hey, guys. I try not to look at this. Actually, can someone take this from me? I'm really bad with my cell phone. I'm like really bad with it.
I'm moderating a panel.
So thanks for coming out. Here, is this yours, babe? Or is this for the Twitter?
I'll give it to you. I got to load it first. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, obviously we have a really eclectic group of panelists. And so basically I have these questions I'm going to ask. Then I'm going to go one by one. Then I'm going to open it up to the crowd, and then we're going to ask some questions that people have asked on Twitter. I need this to be higher. I'm really tall. Okay. So this question is, I think, more for like a lot of the questions are definitely more for screenwriters. Obviously, screenplay competition is a huge part of why this panel is happening. So the first question is, if you're can someone fix this for me? I'm sorry, it's just like kind of falling.
You're so high maintenance, Kaylee.
You're right.
First it was the red M&Ms, now it's the microphone.
Cool. Thank you. I'm wearing heels. Yeah. Okay. So for up-and-coming screenwriters, if you have a screenplay already written, what do you think is the best step in getting it out there? Obviously, now with the internet, it's a lot different than when you had to have a tangible script, send it off. But do you have any pointers or anything for a writer just starting out today? Let's start with you, Drew.
Show it to the producer's mom. I came through the dinosaur days when you had to have in your trunk, like actors have headshots. You had to have like 20 fucking scripts in your trunk. And I was to pay the bills. I was doing props on a very low budget movie for a company called Crystal Sky. Yeah, Adam. Anyway, the mother of the producer, who was she looked like Yoda, and she was about 106 years old, and I was 22, and she had a crush on me, and she said, what do you want to do when you grow up? I was like, well, I'm working in movies, and she's like, well, do you have any other aspirations? I said, I want to be a writer. She's like, do you have a script? Yeah, in my trunk, here. So it was in her hands, and she's like, well, I'll make sure I sit my son down and make him watch this, read this. And he got it, and he's the director, producer of the film, and he's like, don't ever talk to my mother again. But fortunately for me, in my case, he read it reluctantly because his mom made him, and he ended up producing that movie. So he's like, holy shit, you can write. So just have it ready, and show it to everybody. I think, register it with the guild, pay the $20, it's worth it because you can get really screwed later. And then if the location manager wants to see it, let him read it. Because someday that location manager is going to be producing. Because I don't want to say nobody wants to be where they're at, but so many people don't want to be where they're at. And there are people who are going to go up the ladder, and they can help you later. So don't forget the PA who's unloading, Diet Cokes into the thing. Because in my case there too, somebody who was a PA, I helped him carry an ice chest once, and he's like, they were all dicks to me, but you were nice. You want to direct a music video? I'm like, why? He's like, because I'm making them in Europe now. Okay. So you just get it out there. I'd say get it to everybody.
We'll just go down the line, Misha.
Oh, we're gonna do that. No, I would say the same thing. I mean, my route was I paid $150,000 to go to film school, and I got a referral from one of my teachers, luckily. But I remember that when I was when I was in high school, there was a site called Trigger Street, which it was like one of the first sites you could put your material online and get feedback. And I think that's important, is getting feedback, making it as good as you can, so when you get that opportunity to give it to someone that's going to read it and make a difference, that it's the best thing that you could possibly put in their hands.
Oh, well, I've got to agree with all of that. And especially what was being said at the beginning there about, getting things out, what both have said about getting things out widely. I wasted, I think, years just kind of being too paranoid, like everybody often is, whether it's because you think things will be stolen or just because you feel like it's not ready. And I don't think that's worth really fearing about. I guess the one spin I would throw on this would be to almost question the premise in a way, which would be to say, if that's you out there, the person we're describing who's trying to get that first script out there, and it's a horror script, my question would be, what do you really want? If you're really a writer, even a great horror writer, but writing is what it's really about, I'd almost say don't, do it differently and write something differently, because, and something we can come back to, I think the fate of pure writing within this genre is very bad. Right, it's very hard. There was an era when just having written some terrific horror movies, a guy like Aaron Aaron Kruger or some other people I can think of who did terrific work and got lots of great work from having written a horror movie. But in general, I don't think that people look to the writers of horror movies, unfortunately, even successful ones, to then advance. So versus if what you are as a filmmaker, purely, you want to make the movie, you've written it to make it, well, that's a whole other matter. Then you're alive in probably the best time ever to just go try to make your horror movie. Just try to do it. But again, I think if it's about the pure writing, I don't disregard the film school. The peers you get from film school, the teachers and the recommendations is huge. And we also exist now with
Hold your mic a little closer.
The Blood List and the Nichols Fellowship. There's so many opportunities to get scripts read and talked about, and there's this whole world on the internet of things like the Blood List and the Black List and all the various lists out there, so that it's almost now that having a well talked about unproduced script is a terrific thing. I just would say be careful, because like I say, in a way, horror is such a genre. It's so based on its rules and its own formulations and things that often, even the best horror movies, you don't hear people often talking about the screenplays or talking about the writing of them, in part because it's almost taken for granted and tends to be talked about in terms of the direction or other elements of it. So, be careful.
I think just from my perspective, I can't stress the value of writing a script for what your situation currently kind of permits. So, I mean, case in point for Ritual, it was very easy to kind of write something for very cheap, and then it was easier to say, I'm going to make this movie and I'm going to make it now, and I just need a little bit of money. Because as soon as you start telling people that you're going to go and make a film, then people start taking you a little bit more seriously. And if you can say that I can get this film done quickly and I can get it done for much less money than, a $5 million epic where I'm going to destroy a fucking haunted mansion, then it's much easier to do so, I think. That's just from, what happened with us. And, the other thing I think that's very important was my first job was as a script reader, and nothing is more of a necessity, I feel like, than reading thousands of just terrible scripts that are submitted every single day, because, you get to learn a pattern and you get to learn where you start to zone out, and your coverage or whatever and your comments truly, they help that, and they really kind of represent that you understand, how to kind of tell a streamlined or, effective story, and, that not only helps, but if you write enough coverage and you write enough effective coverage, people start to take notice, and they realize that if you want to be a writer, then, maybe a little bit more than all these people who just haphazardly throw their scripts at production companies and hope that it pans out.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything they said. Don't be precious with them. I mean, if you can get somebody who is an ally for you, come to these types of things and meet people who want to work with you and make friends, and get someone to be an ally, because there's nothing more, heartening than when you are out there, you're trying to get something read, and you maybe can't find someone, but you have that one person who's a champion for you, and you can kind of fall back on them. But don't be precious with it. Get people to read your script and get feedback on it. And I think the most important thing, at least for me, and maybe you don't have aspirations to direct, but I think making your content. Because ultimately, especially with the way the industry is now, you can't really rely on the standard machine. So if you have a great idea and you've written a feature-length script and you're excited about it, write a short or turn it into a short, or find a piece about that story that you think you can tell in 2 or 3 minutes, and then figure out a way to get that shot, because maybe someone won't watch or read your script because it's a couple 100 pages long or 120 pages long, but they certainly will watch 2 minutes of something that's really compelling. Figure out a way to get it on screen and get it watched.
Awesome. And that's Andrew Wilson. Hi. We just asked our first question, but actually I'd like to chime in because I do the Blood List, but when I created it, I wasn't a manager, and now I'm a manager. And I definitely represent writers in all genres, but specifically with horror, because of the Blood List and because I just genuinely love the genre as much as I do, I hang out with a lot of people that work in the space, and I can't tell you enough. I just know so many people because I go out every night. I go to parties, I go to movie nights, I go to every film festival. I'm definitely eating everything up with a spoon and watching everything, and knowledge is mostly like the currency in this town. Like your connections and the knowledge of what's going on, what's out there, what people are working on is so invaluable. So if you like catch me at a party and you pitch me something and I'm like, holy shit, please send that to this email, you know, and it's like, not like, oh, I'm the best manager in the world, but I do know enough people. And it's like, you met me at a party. How random, but not really. That's how this town works. So it's like, definitely be creating, be like, oh, hey, I have a Twitter, but I also have a short, but I also have a feature, you know? So it's like, just kind of thinking out of the box about things is really important these days because there's so much volume and everything is like kind of shitty. So if yours is good, then it stands out. Next question. So opposed to every other genre, what do you guys feel are like essential story elements for the horror genre? And this, you know, it's kind of like a broad question, but what do you feel, especially these days, because we've kind of seen it all, what do you think is essential these days for a good horror story?
Are you starting here again? Or
what do you guys want to do?
Give him a break. He got like all our leftovers. You can start over there because we all answered it.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
He had to go, yeah, me too.
Zigzag.
So I'm going to try and say everything so you guys have nothing to say. You have to figure out what compels you. If it really is like straight up horror, then go for it and find it. For me, I really respond to figuring out what the actual story is, and then maybe there's a horror hook that I really respond to that I want to figure out how it fits in my story. But to me, that usually isn't the central story. I think my favorite film of all time is probably Jaws, simply for that reason. It is about a shark attacking people in a town, but it's not. It's also about this character and this family and him trying to deal with mass murder in his hometown. He's a cop, right? Or The Exorcist. It's a girl who's possessed, but it's really about a girl who's losing her mind and her mom's trying to figure out what to do with it. And so they add these like really lovely kernels of real people, and then you build these wonderful, you know, gruesome details on top. And to me, that's what gets me interested. But I would say find out what gets you excited and then build from there.
I really think, you know, especially now in horror, a lot of it really relies on subverting expectations and, you know, just the genre field. Because, you know, starting back in the 80s, I feel like this formula is kind of formed where you've got to kill the first kid in the first minute, and then, you know, every 10 pages you kill another kid, and then you reveal the killer, and it's always someone you least expect. I mean, for the slasher formula at least, but, you know, I think true life horror in the world happens immediately when you're going about your day, when you have nothing, where there's no anticipation. And it's very important to me, and the films that always stick out to me are the characters who don't necessarily realize that they're in horror when the crazy shit starts happening to them. And I feel like, especially now with the ability to shoot things on a DSLR for no money, there's really a whole lot of space to not necessarily have to conform to the 10-page kills. And, you know, it's very, you know, jarring when a movie like Rosemary's Baby pans out as a relationship drama and a whole, you know, stress drama about pregnancy, and then all of a sudden there's a satanic cult involved. So I think it's thinking outside of the box to let the audience think that they're ahead of you or they're on the same page as you, and then totally pulling the rug out from under them is something that I think the most effective horror films really do.
Well, I really agree with that. I want to underline that. I'd say two things. One would be to underline that and to take it even potentially further. All genres are defined by a set of rules, and especially in a kind of development system where you're dealing with executives or producers or whatever, they will often then try to rely on those and talk about the rules. And what are the rules? You know, it's a vampire, so it's got to be asleep by dawn, or it can be killed by whatever. It's a werewolf with silver bullets, whatever it is. The things we grew up with, kind of embracing those rules, when in fact today what is great and distinctive about horror are the things that take those rules apart. That started, yes, very much in the 80s, I think, with things that played with those rules, like Scream and all the things that came in the 80s and 90s and 2000s that did that. But also the Japanese horror films that started coming into our culture, the new waves of European horror films in this last 10, 20 years, some of the great Antipodean work, you know, Wolf Creek and things like that, which all work because they don't follow our rules at all, or they have another set of cultural kind of genre rules like the Japanese do that we don't know. And so it's creepier. It's like, why is that girl walking towards me with her hair over her face? Now, if you were Japanese, you might instantly go, archetypal image of ghost. You know, to us, we don't know that, and it's scarier because we don't. The Grudge is like that. What's the rule in The Grudge? How is it? As opposed to, the thing that we got used to in Scream of here's the rules. Don't be alone, don't do this, don't do that. So instead, taking those apart, taking those expectations apart, some of which are structural expectations, like you're saying. What's going to happen in the first 5 minutes? Delaying, the most effective horror films of all time, I think, delay the horrors almost unbearably long. The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, the others, movies like that where it almost seems like nothing. Wolf Creek is another good example of that one, where almost nothing happens until you're like 40 minutes into it and you've let your guard down and then you're torn apart. And quickly, let me say one other thing. I think that horror at core is like it's got a DNA strand with 2 pieces in it. One piece I like to call the ordeal. It's just physical endurance. It has always been one of the mainstays of the genre, going back to Poe, the premature burial, The Pit and the Pendulum. That still works today. A movie where someone's stuck in a coffin for 90 minutes. Anybody seen that? You know, burial? Well, that's the premature burial, right. So every horror movie will always periodically rely on just pure physical ordeal or endurance. It can be taken to an extreme like torture porn, and then that's all you've got, or it's an element to always be used. But the other strand of that DNA is not the physical endurance, but is something mental, some supernatural enigma. It doesn't have to be supernatural. Some enigma, some mystery. Horror is very connected to mystery. There's something to be figured out. Unlike a mystery, though, you won't figure it out and make it okay. It'll get you before you figure it out, or you'll find out, worse yet, that there is no solution. The universe is meaningless and out to get you, like many horror films suggest. So at core, I think it's that, this interweaving of, on the one hand, intense physical anxiety or ordeals with the kind of mental equivalent of that, of facing some mental enigma, some cosmic horror of what's really going on here. And so the scariest things to me are where I'm going back and forth between, like, say, Chainsaw Massacre, your genius client's genius movie, one of the greatest horror films of all time, that brilliantly, constantly mixes this intense physical anxiety and physical endurance with this general cosmic enigma of who are these people? What are they doing? Why? What does it have to do with the sunspots? And why are they doing these crazy things? So that's my little mini lecture on it.
I would say getting stuck in a meeting and being late for a panel, that's horrific for me. You know, in terms of horror, I think that there's one thing that should be relatively obvious, but something that tends to get lost in translation sometimes, which is that horror movies have scares. That's what they're designed to do. And I think it's something that a lot of writers, at their inception, sort of lose sight of the fact that that's what you're setting out to do. You need to be able to effectively scare an audience for it to be a horror movie, or else it's not that, or else it's something else. It's some other genre or subgenre in the space. So the scripts that I get that someone says, well, it's a great sort of, atmospheric horror, or it's a sort of creepy town or something. Okay, that's cool, but that's kind of one sort of element to it. That doesn't, in and of itself, make it a horror movie. You still have to create the thing that distributors can hang their hat on, that foreign buyers can step up to and say, great, it doesn't matter what language that film is in, I get what that is. I see what that, talking about The Grudge with a, creepy little girl with her hair over her face, it doesn't matter if that's Japanese or English, you understand that that's a creepy image, So I would say the idea of focusing on the fact that it's there to scare audiences and see what worked in previous films and then get out ahead of the curve in terms of horror. That to me are the principles of it.
I agree with everything that's been said as well. But to the scare note, I also think that the thing you have to remember that makes horror, good horror, really transcend the kind of the tropes of the genre is characters, because you have to care about these people who are in these crazy situations. And I think it's when you do, that's when every scare is a true scare, because you're worried about what's going to happen to the heroine that's going through it. So I would say to to really focus on making your main character, your final girl, your final guy, someone we can really root behind. I think that's one of the things also that Scream had when it came, and it was different, was that we actually like Sydney as well. And we're like, oh, we want this girl to figure out who it is before she gets killed. And also to reiterate what you guys were talking about, using genre as metaphor. This is a story about kids who are turning into ghosts because they feel invisible. You know, Sunflower, this script I wrote, was about two girls trapped in a house with a serial killer, and they start competing against each other to stay alive. And really, it's a metaphor for how women fight against each other for men. That man happens to be a serial killer. And I think that that's when you get the best horror, is when you can layer something real that we understand as the metaphor for the genre.
I 100% disagree with everything they've said. I'll start with that. No,
Expected that.
Way to redefine.
No, this is as entertaining for, I think, all of us as it is for you guys. I think that I think horror is the coolest genre to write for, because it's the only genre in Hollywood, maybe the rest of the world, where if I'm telling you about a horror film, I don't need to tell you, and it's got so-and-so in it. You don't need that in a horror film, and that's why, ironically, horror is, even though it doesn't, the writers are badly abused in horror, because most horror scripts are shit. You know, I've written some myself. But the thing is if you have a good horror concept, you can go to someone, and when you listen at the mall or listen at the movie theater, they're like, oh, it's this movie about a guy, he cuts people up and he wears their fucking skin on his face and he's got a chainsaw. It's like, you know, no one said, oh, there's a new Gunnar Hansen movie coming out. You know? So it gives the power to the writer. The writer actually is the star secretly, and I think we all know that, because you're basing a concept. I mean, Roger Corman talked about this for years, you know, through all of his, you know, Vincent Price movies. It's like, you know, it's Vincent Price is Vincent Price. He's going to sell his thing. But this one's about, you know, a guy who's, you know, having a party while everybody's dying of the plague, you know. And so it's, get your concept, get your thing that hooks them in entirely. The other thing I think is really super important is humans are pack animals or herd animals, depending on who you talk to. So many horror people have depended on gore or the creature, you know, and when you're directing one of these things and they bring the monster out, it's really exciting. It's more fun than shooting a comedy or a sitcom or anything, because the monster's on set. This is cool. Look what we're doing for a living. So what that means is a lot of people, and I found the good producers don't do this, but many producers do. The pitfall that they fall into is they think that we need to hold on that monster as long as possible. We need to show that thing, because you guys have been designing it for, you know, 6 weeks or 10 weeks or a year, and that's the monster, that's the poster. When in fact, I think the key to horror, I guess this is more of a directing answer, I'm sorry, but the key to horror is knowing that we're pack animals and we're herd animals. So if you guys look at me and I'm like terrified and I'm looking up there, most of you are going to turn around and look to make sure it's not going to fucking hurt you. And that's how we're wired. We're genetically wired to respond to fear from each other, not necessarily from the creature. So this comes around to a casting choice, which means get good actors. You know, get a good monster who has a sense of horror and a sense of creep, or you're just going to get a stuntman stumbling through in a rubber suit. And get good actors who can respond to that. You know, there are a lot of young actors, because we kill them by the dozens in horror films, and they go to these goddamn summer camps and we kill them every time. But you need the good summer camp actors. You need the good new faces who can sell fear. And fear is one of the hardest things for an actor to sell. It just is. Anger is easy. Comedy's tough. Fear is, I think, the hardest thing in the world. And I've run poor actors through 88 takes of a scream or a look just to get that one. Oh my God! I mean, if you have cats, everybody has a cat. They'll suddenly look up behind you in the middle of the night when you're by yourself. You're like, "What the fuck are you looking at?" And then it's licking its paws, and you're like, "You weren't looking at anything. You're an idiot." But that's, ironically, that's the look you want from your actors. You want to catch that, holy shit, what's behind me? And that is, I think that's key to building the horror. So I guess that's my answer.
No, good answers. I feel like, you know, my next question will just kind of be based on what you guys have been talking about. So kind of, you know, redefining the tropes. We've kind of seen it all. Horror is a very well-worn genre. we have the J-horror, the slashers, the creature features, the torture porn, like the found footage, which I'm super sick of. And, we're always trying, especially as a manager and also, some execs, and we have a very eclectic bunch as discussed. A question I get asked a lot is, what's the next franchise? And if I had the answer, I'd tell you, and I'd be in my baller mansion up the hill. But, it's like, there's so much that we could be doing. Do you guys have any thoughts on where the genre is heading, especially based on what we've had lately? And not, you don't have to like tell your ideas, but I'm just kind of curious because everybody's trying to get their franchise instead of realizing that like maybe you should create a great character that people want to see more of. But that's just my answer. So do you want to start, Drew?
I actually would love to start on that one if you guys are.
Okay.
I'm sure you all have a version of this philosophy. It's called the fear paradigm. And the fear paradigm changes about every 10 years. In the 1930s and the 1940s, it was humans changing into ungodly creatures. It was Dracula. He was a man, and now he's undead. And it freaked audiences out. My dad said he was terrified at Frankenstein because it was a dead body that they fucking sewed together, And at the time, that was unthinkable. Wolfman, losing control, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, all these, the classic monsters. In the 1950s, it was science gone mad. Now you've got Creature from the Black Lagoon and Them and, Invasion. Well, actually, in the 1960s, it became communist scares. So it's a paranoia. It's like the commies are going to get us. So Invasion of the Body Snatchers, your enemy's right there. Invaders from Mars and all those movies. And then Vietnam in the 60s and 70s put these unbelievable shots of gore into our house, and you're watching Walter Cronkite, and then you're cutting to a guy who's like, he's got his chest hanging out, being dragged by on a stretcher. So gore became a big thing. And horror took a bloody turn. And then in the 80s, it was paranoia and drugs. And also this weird morality that came out of nowhere. It's like, don't have sex and don't do drugs. So now we're going to do 20 years of killing teenagers who are trying to have a good time. So then, in the 90s, we got deconstructionists because now we're in a cut and paste culture. And it's like, let's do Scream and let's deconstruct horror. Let's study why it's scary and then scare them on that. Then, Guantanamo Bay comes along. We all feel guilty about torture, but we're all really pissed off about 9/11. We don't know how to deal with it, so now you get torture porn. I don't know what the future holds, like you. I'd love to have that house next door to yours. But I sincerely feel, on a very serious note, that something happened in Newtown, Connecticut that changed all of us. And there's probably no one in here who didn't shed a tear that day. It was horrible. And I'm a parent. I have 2 kids. They're 4 and 9. And it fucking killed me. I had relatives calling and crying, and people I knew who were in Connecticut, and the Facebook, everybody makes the Newtown flag as their Facebook post. To me, it feels like a 9/11. That felt like a big moment. I don't know what to do with it yet, and I think that the writers who start going in that direction of we failed our innocence. Those children were as innocent and as pure and beautiful as we can ever get, and we completely failed them. In our system. And there are people who say it's mental health, there are people who say that it's guns, there are people who say that it's, you didn't watch your neighbor, there are people who say, and you see the heroes of these 3rd grade teachers. And that was, to me, as horrific as 9/11. And I think it's as horrific as the Vietnam War. And I think it's as horrific as the communists may take us over, because that really scared that generation. I think there's a fear paradigm shift. And I think if you're cued into it, and I think there were 2 particular things that came before it, but reflect what I think may be to come, like The Walking Dead. He's protecting that little boy and the wife, and that's the protection of innocence. And even before it happened, it got us. And I think that things like that are insidious, where it's parents trying to save a child that they don't think they can save. I think those are really important things. And I think just being cued into the news a little bit and how your own feelings are about the news is a big step in writing the right screenplay.
I think everything you just said about the breakdown of the generations and how it was is great, but I think when you're in the middle of it, you can't really have that kind of outlook on it, so you just have to focus on what scares you and write from there, and then in 20 years we'll see how it all came together in a good way, and it was clear that this was what affected everyone, but I do think you just have to start with what scares you, and I think that we all have such universal things inside of us that we'll find that scares a lot of people too.
I think that over time there are certain principles that work in each and every one of those sort of subgenres that we're talking about. So you can kind of go back and look at what the common through lines are. Through all those different types of horror films that worked over time. I think that people, years ago when I was with Twisted Pictures and Evolution, and we did the first Saw movie. After that, I remember getting every other bad version of that type of movie that you could possibly imagine came through after that. Like, here's just another, just put guys in a room, let them torture each other, and everyone just assumed, like, great, we can just make tons and tons of those. But, it doesn't work that way. You have to be out in front of it instead of trying to chase the thing that just worked for somebody else. I think right now we are in a phase of, Kaylee mentioned found footage before. We're in a phase right now where I think that's probably a phrase that's a little bit overused. I mean, not everything, Blair Witch Project was found footage. People lost the footage that was then found later by someone and, weirdly enough, edited and had score put to it, and those sort of things. But that's what found footage is. I think that people use that term to describe, documentary-styled filmmaking and cinema verite and every other type of sort of handheld filmmaking. But the short answer is figure out what the next thing is that's going to work and what's going to work for you, and then worry about sort of changing a generation of horror audiences. Just figure out for that next one film, and don't worry about chasing a trend out there.
Wow, lots of brilliant stuff there. I think all that's great, especially love really, really focusing on what scares you, as she said. I mean, if I am not creeping myself out a bit when I'm constructing a sequence or a moment, then I can't expect anybody else will be. Now, obviously, in the act of writing, it's not, it's not, you might think, well, how can you be? Because you're thinking about it, but still, you have to find that and draw upon that. And I've always been fascinated, too, by that sense that there is this tremendous change. Sometimes it seems by decades or by generations about what it is. And that's so true, and I think you get a window into the culture and into different countries even by their horror movies. That said, it's also the least historical, most essential, most archetypal, most eternal genre, because it's about things like death. That number one, right? And and I mean, to the extent it's changing, yes, the technologies of death change, and therefore some of the things that are most scary about death might change, and how you treat the threat of death might change in those films. Or similarly, the issue with found footage. Forget the term found footage. In every period of horror, one of the things that horror will always be doing is actually trying to break through to find the most realist form that the medium can take at any given moment. Because precisely when you're telling these fantastical things that don't really exist, they need to be really grounded for people to believe them and to be scared of them. So the codes at any given period of what makes something look most real will often be found in the cutting edge of horror. So something like the found footage, that if to the extent it's wearing out in a way, it's because it no longer is the big denotation of reality. It was really scary, especially in Blair Witch, simply because it felt realer. But in the same ways that Night of the Living Dead did in its context, because of the ways it broke all kinds of rules of realism and Texas Chainsaw and things like that. But at heart, there isn't anything going on in any horror movie that Aristotle wouldn't recognize. When he asked, why do we get pleasure from watching horrible events on stage? It's the same thing. So there must be something really fundamental. So yes, look for the new things. Pay attention to the news. Find what's terrifying to you now. And as you live through life, different things will be scarier. I used to find some things scarier. Now, also as a parent and as an older guy, things with children, some of them I can't even watch. Things that I used to be able to watch or even write, I find, no, I can't go there now. It's too painful for me. Newtown was a bit like that. It was just too much again when you become a parent. So also attend to where you are in your life, but don't forget that in the end, we are talking about the most eternal things of all, like life and death. and the fear of that, and therefore these are the most classic things which therefore can be accessed by turning into your inside to find out what scared you. When you were 5, what scared you? When you were 15, what scared you? When you were 25, what scared you? You know, at various times I've even had notes where I've kind of kept track of the things that were most scary at different life stages. And I refer back to those depending on the age of the character. You know, because the thing that's going to absolutely turn a teenager into a blubbering, quivering mass of jelly is not the same thing that's going to turn a 52-year-old into a blubbering mass of jelly, let alone the thing that would turn a 90-year-old into that.
Well, I don't know what the next trend is, but I think that we're definitely at a very exciting moment where horror is kind of creeping itself into other genres, almost to the point where it's winning Academy Awards. I mean, if No Country for Old Men isn't a slasher movie, I have no idea what a slasher film is. You know, Michael Haneke, if any of you saw More, like, that's one of the most excruciatingly horrifying films ever made. And I think, you know, there's something to be said about taking genres like household dramas and, you know, crime cappers like No Country for Old Men. I mean, the Coen brothers have been doing it forever. Blood Simple is the pulpiest, most horrifying, you know, horror film ever. But, you know, I think there's that moment as horror becomes, you know, as these television shows, you know, get all these ratings, and, you know, as horror becomes more mainstream, it hopefully, ideally, will become something that is more universally accepted and considered the art that it really is. I think that there are a lot of very promising up-and-coming, you know, filmmakers who really blindside audiences. But like, one that comes to mind is The Kill List. I mean, that's a hitman drama, and there is nothing horrific about it, and it's really a beautiful film. And then at the last 10 minutes, you are completely taken. You know, that's when everything, you know, hits the fan, and so that's what's exciting to me, and that's what I hope is the next trend, where, you know, horror films do win Academy Awards. That would be great. I mean, No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood are two very, very horrifying films. Even Drive is another example. That's the story of a psychopath. So yeah, that's what I hope for.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna go. You're talking about two different things. There's lots of different ways to do a horror movie or any movie. If you're making one that you just want to be, you know, living in the world of horror and gore and very, you know, direct, then make that movie. I think I see a trend. At least maybe it's not a trend. It's what I respond to. Are movies that are more grounded or have something that I really respond to on an emotion level. And then when something happens that's terrible, I really care. Let the Right One In is like my favorite movie of the past few years, and it's a love story, but it's messed up, and I really love it. And I think you have to find a way to tell your story that is terrifying to you. You can find something that is scary, like Kill List. I was talking to the guy who directed that, guy named Ben. He was trying to find what scared the hell out of him the most, and it happened to be crazy people who would because of their beliefs, act out violently to other people. And he was like, okay, how am I going to make that movie? And he figured out a way to make that movie. And that might not be scary in a lot of other settings, but he made it kind of messed up. So I think you just got to figure out what you think is scary. I think everyone there are uniform things that are scary. If you're walking down a dark alley and something explodes behind you, you're not going to be like, eh. Like, you're going to be scared, so you can find things that everyone will respond to. And I'm going to out myself now because it's probably going to come out later. My movie is a found footage movie.
Wear it with pride, man.
Yeah. It's called The Blair Witch Situation. No, but, you know, it is something that is constantly ragged on, and I actually get it. I think, for me, I had to make a movie that I could make, and I actually made a conscious choice to make a movie that the story was served by that element, that justification. Now, when you get lazy, you don't do that. You do it because it is the next thing. You make the next, you know, Saw ripoff because you haven't paid attention to what is going to make this story a good story, and this served its purpose for me. That being said, you can make terrible movies if you want. Just try not to.
Well, also found footage is interesting because, you know, you have stuff, not necessarily that Chronicle was found footage, but that and the Project X, and it's kind of transcending into other genres, which is cool. And I wasn't trying to talk shit on the genre. It's just whenever anybody says it, I read so many that it's just like, I gotta be honest. And I worked with Jason Blum and Steven Schneider on Paranormal 1, so it's like I've just seen it too many times, and similar to the Saw, you know, ripoff times 7,000. It's like you got to think about why those are special. It's because they were the first, or the first one in 10 years. And it's like Saw was great because we're like, holy shit, what are they doing right now? Same thing with Paranormal. It's like the first time I saw it, I've seen so many movies, and I let myself get scared, so I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm such a badass. But I was watching it, and I'm like, oh my God, Steven, is that like a real movie? Like, I know that you're my boss and you produced it, but like, are you sure it's not real? And I'm serious. I asked him that on my first day on the job. I'm like, and I've seen it like 30 times and it still scares me.
I mean, you should talk shit about it, because the reality is there are a lot of bad movies, but those people didn't take the time to figure out what would be the best version of their movie. If anyone saw Silent House in the past,
I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the best movie of all time, but it is. It's a cinema verite movie. It's found footage, sort of. It's the same type of style, and they use that type of, you know.
Well, yeah, it's a fluid master.
Well, it's cinema verite. I mean,
exactly.
That's
it's using that aesthetic to serve your story. Yeah. So talk shit, because a lot of people don't pay attention to that.
It's very case specific. If you look at the rec films, like, those are amazing, you know, and then they're like, oh, let's do POV, and you know, it's like, it's very case specific. I just was rolling my eyes because I just hear it so often, but that's not your fault.
We do too. Every time we walk into a room, they say, what do you have that's found footage?
It just depends. Some people want it, some people don't. If you're doing something, I want to know why you're doing it, and if you're going to be spending everybody's time and your money, I just want to know that you know that there's a lot of competition out there, and it's not easy. That's all I'm saying. We're going to take a couple questions from some people on Twitter, and basically what I'd like to do is just kind of like popcorn questioning. Like, if you feel compelled to answer that question, do. If not, moving on. So this first question is from Trevor CK, and it's just, what's the scariest movie you've ever seen and why?
Ooh, ever?
And you literally just like whoever wants to talk.
The Exorcist, when I was 12, when it first came out, there's no doubt. I mean, I literally had nightmares for like 2 years, and was completely traumatized, and I'm sure my parents should never have let me see it. So I have to say it was definitely The Exorcist for me, no doubt.
The 1963 version of The Haunting was pretty rough on me when I was a kid. If any of you have seen it, you might know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't, go rent it. You're in for a treat. There's a 45-second shot of a doorknob. And when the doorknob finally, it's two women in a room. There's a bunch of different kinds of psychics in this house to see if it's haunted or not. The main character may or may not be mentally unstable. It's that formula. But there's a great scene where they're in this bedroom, and it's this Gothic mansion, and literally, was it Robert Wise who directed that? Yeah, Robert Wise. He put the camera on the doorknob and just had the sounds in the hallway. For 45 seconds, I timed it. And when the doorknob just goes, I almost shit my pants. And I thought, anybody who can film a doorknob and make me that scared, because there's lots of scary scenes in all these movies, but I think I was surprised at the masterfulness of the craft of someone who could show me a doorknob and make me want to die.
Definitely The Exorcist for me as well. And then I think after that, Blair Witch, because I saw it in theaters and I didn't know anything about it. And I vowed I would never go camping again, ever. And then, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but a movie that ruined my life was Communion with Christopher Walken. My older sister was having a sleepover with her friends, and I watched the first 10 minutes, and then for the next, 7 years, I went to the library and read every book about aliens that they had, and I convinced myself I wasn't going to get abducted every single night because I couldn't sleep unless I convinced myself. So it's embarrassing.
I think Rosemary's Baby had a profound psychological effect on me. It damaged me. I think because the scariest part about that film is that there could be no devil element in it, and just being surrounded by insane people who make you feel insane, and that perfect just like facade is what truly, the paranoia element is really what's horrifying to me. And also, I think there's something to be had about the original Stepford Wives. I think it speaks a lot on a lot of different levels. you know, and I'm not even like a girl who's going to marry a guy who's going to make me the perfect wife. So like, you know, something about that really, really affected me. I think that's a great film as well that gets less love than it deserves.
The Shining for me is definitely the one. I mean, that gentleman's pumping his fist in there. He's thrilled. I mean, just the tension that's built up in that film. You know, even as a kid, and I was entirely too young to have seen that film the first time I did. It's palpable, and I remember having nightmares about the creepy little girls in that movie. So for me, that's definitely the milestone film.
Keeping on the Stephen King, Pennywise
TV
kept
movie.
me up many nights. When I mean, in the movie, you go back and you watch it. It wasn't particularly the miniseries done well. It's just that it was the perfect Pennywise to me, and it's my favorite book. So
That part with the blood coming out of the photo album, I was like, forget about it. Like, I can't. Like, I
mean,
can't.
just come and play with us. Oh, we all float down here.
Oh my
Come
God.
on.
I know. I watched it when I was like
We
5.
all
I'm like,
float
no.
down here? Just think about what that means. What does that even mean? It scares the shit out of me.
Oh, I actually, The Shining for me, I'm like obsessed with The Shining, I think, at this point. It's funny, my roommate actually represents Rodney Asher, who just did Room 237, and I was like, I can't, like, really? I'm just like, I have to talk to you about this for 5 hours. But for me, it's like, I've seen it probably like 50 or 60 times now, but what I think is so good is, once again, talking about the characters, or even the 45-second shot, it's like, you're like, pushing in on Jack, and he's like having this freak out, but it's just with a couple facial expressions, and you're like, holy shit, what is he gonna do? Oh, he's gonna go like try to kill his family. Like, okay, naturally. And then you get like just everything about it is just, and maybe it's because Kubrick's so damn genius, but it's like everything's so perfect and everything's so meticulous, and just like, obviously, if you know anything about the movie, you know he had people do 150 takes and whatever and get those very specific responses. It's just a perfect movie, so whatever.
Watching those lunatics break down every frame of that film in that documentary is nearly as frightening as the original movie is.
I know!
And I absolutely loved it. It's incredibly well done.
It's so
I
good.
might actually be in the minority, but I'm a Stephen King purist, so I actually like the miniseries that they did of the movie.
It was okay.
Because
You're
and
into
it stuck,
miniseries.
it stuck more to the book, which I thought was super fucking scary too.
Did you ever see
so.
Burnt Offerings? I feel like that's
Oh,
I feel like
man.
that's that was like, I think 76. I don't think he wrote the book till like 80. I'm not saying he copied anything, but whatever.
Was that Stephen King? I actually didn't know that.
No,
Burnt
it's
Offerings?
not. No, but he wrote the book after that movie came out.
Oh,
I just feel like
okay.
it's kind of comparable because it's like, you know, family in a house, and you remember that swimming pool scene?
Yes.
Like, holy crap.
And Karen Black is just so dreamy.
She is so good in that, right?
She's good in everything that she does. I think that's a general consensus.
That movie's creepy. Interesting question. From Carney22, any specific script contests you guys would recommend? There's a lot of them out there. Any that you kind of have seen better stuff come out of?
This one, right here. That's the money for you.
Screencraft.
Screencraft and Dread Central presents, and the Blood List, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be a little careful with those because I think there are some out there that are just ways of, you know, making money and collecting your $100 or whatever it costs to get in there. And most of these came about kind of after my era of coming in. I don't think there really were script contests, really, so I certainly wasn't aware of them at the time. But in the years since then, certainly the one you always hear about is the Nichols Fellowship. And it's obviously not genre-oriented, but genre films have made it through there, and I think people take it very, very seriously. I'm not sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, Nichols is certainly still a good one. I mean, I would say there's a couple of good ones out there, but more so than anything else, I would just check the history of what it is and sort of what the who's involved in it, and if it's just something that's about you bring a bag of cash to someone to get your script read, then it's not really a contest.
I'd also say watch for contests that winning means that you have a 6-month option with them for $1,000 too. Those kind of things I would steer clear of.
Actually, on that one, can I be a dissenting voice? No. Okay, never mind. I hate contests about art, but at the same time, it is nice to see them celebrated, you know, because it's a chance for people who may not have access to agents and managers and things, and they do get represented. But I think the thing to keep in mind is you're writing your script and you get in there and you lose 6 contests, you don't get turned into one, you know. You still may have a place for your script, and don't let that discourage you, because I'm the guy that hates the Oscars too, so I guess I'm kind of a dick.
Whoa, sacrilegious. Anybody else? Anything else to say about that? No. Just kidding. Yeah, I feel like Nichols probably. I mean, there's a lot. Like, I think, Screamfest, Shriekfest, all the festivals have screenwriting competitions. I feel like I'm not, like, pro or against it necessarily. I'm more just, like, I think it's a great vetting system. And it's like, you never know if a representative's assistant is going to be like, I read this script on a whim, it won this contest, and it happens to be great. So, like anything else, it's a vetting system.
It's actually a great tool for you guys on that side of the table who have to vet through all this crap, So
yeah,
it's like
I find it useful.
So I guess it is useful that way. It just
and philosophically, I mean, getting jobs and booking assignments out there in the world is it's a contest. I mean, that's it's all a contest. So. It's not everybody's a winner. That's the way the world works. There's good and bad.
So let's make more contests.
Everybody wins. This one is specifically for the Bloodless. So, I mean, do you want me to? I guess I'll answer it. So it's from MIP Talk. How does one get on the Bloodlist or submit their material for consideration? I mean, honestly, it's one of those things. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I ask 150 execs usually that like work all across town in different genres at different companies that get a lot of dark genre stuff, what their top 3 favorite genre scripts are. So it's like, unfortunately, you might have to be a little bit of an insider. It's not like the walls are impenetrable, but they're pretty hard to get through. That being said, it's done. Like Misha has had a lot of success at a really young age because of Sunflower. Like that was her script that launched her, was on the blacklist, was on all these lists, and then she's staffed on 5 television shows, and she's obviously super young.
It was that easy.
Exactly, and it's not. But that being said, like I was saying earlier, it's like, talk to people, get people to read your script. I get so many queries a day that sometimes I don't look at any of them. Sometimes I'm like, I pop this open, I'm like, sure, why not submit it to me? And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't personally vote on the list. I don't personally tally it. I'm the one that puts it all together. I have to read everything. I have to make sure all the rep info is correct. Like, because I'm a rep, it's a little bit of a conflict of interest in that way. But, it's like, if you have good material, an exec will be like, what have you been reading lately? And another exec will be like, I read this, it's great. And then the next thing you know, you have a script that's getting like 40 votes and that person doesn't have a rep, and then I get excited because then I get to rep them. So it's like, it's not like it's impossible, but I mean, it's hard, but so is everything. And also on the Bloodless website, you can submit, but it's like it's this whole thing. You have to like, my friend has a covered system and I get it covered and then I read it and it's this whole thing. But if you want to do that, you should totally do that. And then the last one, I think we kind of touched on it. It's just about like budget ranges for horror films. Do you want me to read it? Okay. It's from Joe Screenwriter. What is the minimum?
Joe. That's a great name.
Joe.
I know Joe.
I know. I'm actually surprised someone got that handle. I'm surprised someone hasn't bought it off him. What is the minimum budget needed to produce a quality indie horror film, and how important are the stars?
$0, Joe Screenwriter.
You tell me, Joe.
Yeah. I mean, I really think like, look at Paranormal Activity as a perfect example. That movie cost what, $15,000 when it came out, and it's a great scary film. It's a terrifying movie. Now with the digital capabilities, it's endless. You can shoot a movie and edit it in your bedroom.
Yeah, I mean,
no money is what it costs.
Now it's tricky though because, again, how can I put it? As the entry cost to make a movie has gone down, the difficulty of getting anybody to see that movie has gone up.
Yeah.
Right? Once upon a time, it was literally impossible to make a movie. And whoever managed to could guarantee that everybody on Earth would want to see it because it was such a thing of rarity. And then for years, we had studios and big companies that still controlled a very difficult and expensive process that you could pretty much be guaranteed if you put it someplace, anywhere, people will line up and come because it was there. Well, now we are in this moment when, yes, absolutely, like Mickey says, you could do something for nothing, and you could even do something brilliant for nothing. And the new challenge is not how do I get the movie made? It's how do I get anybody to know it's there? Yeah. How do I get anybody to see it or care about it?
Yeah, it's like it used to be a needle in a haystack. Now it's a needle in a stack of needles.
Yeah.
Well put.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I think one thing that I sort of hear a lot of out there, especially at like film festivals or or places where there's a lot of new talent, is, well, they did a lot for a little. at some point in time, I just want to say, we'll get some more fucking money. Like,
Yeah.
you did a lot for little. Congratulations, but I still need it to be something good enough to be able to get somebody to come into a theater and pay $12 to go see the movie. So the guy who's going to go pay and buy a ticket to see the movie doesn't care that you did a lot for a little bit of money. They just want to see a movie that's as good as the big Warner Brothers release because they're paying the same amount of money to see it.
Yeah, I would speak a little differently about it, though. Conceivably, you could make a movie for no money, but that's assuming you have a camera and know how to operate it and have a crew and your best friend's a really good sound guy and you have an editor who knows his way around the program you want to use. And it's true, you absolutely can do that. The caveat I would say is you need, I guess, to make a movie on favors at the very least, because you have to have a crew, and you have to have. I mean, surround yourself. No, you don't have to, but it's nice. I think you should surround yourself with people who you want to work with, and figure out a way to problem solve making a movie with them, because those are your resources. And I think, to speak to what you were saying, Andrew, I would say that you have to. There's a responsibility now, I think, on filmmakers, because there's so much content, to not only think of the content, it's also to think of the content, execute the content at a high level, and then while you're doing that the entire time, think with how you're going to reach an audience. Because your job it isn't just making a movie anymore, it's making a movie and marketing a movie, and distributing a movie if you have to. My film, we have a fantastic distribution partner in Cinedigm. That being said, we have always been very involved in marketing the film since day one, and that's all I do all day, and my crew, that's all we do now for the past few weeks is 18-hour days working on the marketing, because that's how we're going to reach our audience, and we're the most invested in it, so might as well give everything we have. So just think with that as you're making your movie all the way through. It's hard sometimes, making the movie, it's really, if you plan it out right, it's not that hard, but also think with how you're going to reach an audience and who your audience is at the beginning.
I actually can't agree with Andrew enough about the point of, like, people will always start with, well, I shot this for $15,000 and I don't really care. I would much rather watch your movie and be like, how much did you shoot that for? That's always like, it always matters. The quality matters. I don't care if you spent $5 million or $5. The quality is the only thing that matters. And I feel like with Redbox and VOD and on demand and all that, there's so, like, it's like the dregs. And if something does stand out, it's like, it could have cost $6 million. We've all seen The Room, like there are some pitfalls of filmmaking. And then there's stuff like The Paranormal that's just completely knocks it out of the park, or The Monsters, or The Troll Hunter, or all these like lower budget films that have kind of stood out over time. So I feel like we should open it up to the crowd now. Does anybody have a question for anybody? Go ahead.
I'll see if I can word this right. Going to the movies, I see a lot of them, and I've noticed a lot of horror movies now go for jump scares. Mm-hmm. Do y'all, and this is for anybody, do y'all think that that's where the genre, all the producers are trying to make them look towards, instead of going like the mind fucks like The Shining or The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby or anything? Do you think that's where the producers are going for? Do you think the horror genre can get back to that?
Look at everybody going for their mic.
Here, I'll repeat the question in case anybody didn't hear it. So basically the question was talking about jump scares and kind of how integral they are in the beginning, and how much people think of them before shooting, essentially.
I jump on that just briefly to say, my whole vision of jump scares really got transformed in the process of working on Haunting in Connecticut. Just say, first off, I don't think there's ever more or less in them. It is just built in, okay? It's just built in. The Shining has jump scares, too. Mm-hmm. Sure. Everything does. It's a technique, okay? I gained a lot more respect for them via a man who I have huge respect for, Jason Constantine, over at Lionsgate, who I think is the god of jump scares and really knows and understands them. And really, even at the script levels, first time I'd met somebody at the script level who was able to have read Tim and mine's script and say, great, can you give me 3 more jump scares? I was like, what, you have an exact number? He's like, yeah, I got an exact number. And we went for it and did it. But in then taking the time to think about why was that so important, it changed my whole vision. And I can say it super simply. It's a physiological thing. I mean, obviously, if a movie was nothing but jump scares, it would be annoying. But the fact is, a jump scare is a physiological technique for altering the psychophysiology of the audience. It literally changes the hormones, the heart rate. It changes the rate of blood to your brain. You're a different person for like the 7 minutes after the jump scare. So the issue is not, are you going to have a jump scare or not a jump scare? It's how do you use the jump scare? And it's a tricky one because the audience is always kind of pissed off at you with the jump scare, especially if it's a fake one. Oh, it's just a cat. And they all go, ah, and they make this sound. But at the same time, even when they're doing that, they've been changed by it, and now you've got 7 minutes to do stuff.
You're pissed off at themselves for jumping, yeah, for falling for it. You know?
It changes them, and now you can do something interesting. So what's really interesting is not the jump scare, it's what are you going to do for 7 minutes after the jump scare when you've got people in this other state. Now you can just walk them down a hallway, and nothing happens.
Exactly.
And it feels different because of the ways you've altered their physiology by the jump scare.
Have you guys ever seen that cartoon where there's a guy pushing another guy? And then there's another guy on his knees behind the guy getting pushed, and you know that the next frame is him falling over the guy. You guys are, it's a model. That's what the jump scare is. It's, you know, you're pushing the guy, but then he's off balance. The jump scare is you're throwing your audience off balance. It's a spice that you don't want to use too much, or you're gonna have too much garlic in your soup. But then they're off balance. That's exactly it. The problem with some of the jump scares is that they're easy as a technique. Almost anyone can do them. It's that follow-up that's really super important, because the jump scare, the comedic equivalent is getting hit in the balls with a piñata from an 8-year-old. You know, see, it's funny and everyone laughs every time, but then you go, God damn it, I just laughed at somebody get hit in the balls again. You know, it's like, oh fuck, a cat jumped out at me. Oh, well, okay, that was scary. But then it's what you do with it next.
You can't use it as a Band-Aid. You can't put a jump scare in a shitty movie and suddenly make it a good movie. It's not a current trend either. It's not something that just started in recent years. It's maybe you're sort of noticing it more, or maybe there are more of them in some of the films. But I mean, it's been around since the advent of horror. So it's something that has to be used the right way. And Jason Constantine, that's weirdly enough a great example of a guy who at Lionsgate understands what they are and how to utilize them, and not in a sort of cheesy way. He's telling you, we need 8 jump scares in here, and you might not understand that as he's explaining it to you, but it's going to take pressure off of the movie in the long run, because he knows in his mind, he's already thought through to the distribution of it, where this is going to come out in post, and how the audience is going to sit there and react to those jump scares in it. So it's not just a thoughtless, well, make it more scary, and more people will watch it. It's thought through from shooting through post, through distribution and marketing the film.
The first jump scare was in, I think, the George Millet film is 1896. One of the first films, and I think it was called Satan's Castle or The Devil's Castle. You can find it on YouTube. It's like a 4-minute short of a guy jumping up and down really fast because they had the old film. But those were some great jump scares, and so they're not new.
I mean, it's a tool, and you can use it cheaply, as we all recognize, or if you figured out a way to make your story, if it's a horror movie inherently scary already, then it's a great tool. And I used to hate it, or thought that I hated it, until I realized that if you, like The Shining is a perfect example. Like, there will be no jump scares for a significant portion of the time, but for some reason you're still really uncomfortable, and then when they finally hit it, it means something. It's not just a cheap out. It really does mean something to you, and it gets you going. So, or like Paranormal is a great example. Like the first thing that I think the male character says is, "We're going to investigate your paranormal activity." So for the rest of the movie, that's all they ever talk about, and all they ever say is that one topic. So you're wait, okay, ghosts. Everywhere's a ghost. So when you hear the ice machine making ice, you're like, oh god, oh god, oh god. And then she says it's the ice, and you're like, okay, but it's still scared you. It's just the tool. Using it rightly.
Well, that doorknob I talked about, that's a jump scare. And goddamn was that cheap, and it just killed me. So, I mean, I'm still talking about it. I'm 43, and I'm still talking.
Well, even in Paranormal, too, I think the good mechanism that they used was when, like, every time that it was a shot of the bed, it's like, we know, it's like, oh, shit. Like, and like I said, I've seen it a zillion times, and I saw a billion different people react to it, like different ages, sexes, races, everything. And everyone was different. And I feel like when that happens, you're like, oh, shit. Like, that's when you grab the chair, or that's when you grab your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. And that's kind of the same thing as a jump scare. I feel like you're just like, creating all this tension. Then it goes, and we're like, okay, cool. And then they're like, oh, and then it's like that's what's fun about horror.
Yeah, you choose tension over jump scares is basically what I think. Is
But
a lesson.
most of us have an image in our head that I don't even know how true it is, though it got repeated in this recent movie about Hitchcock, of Hitchcock sitting in the lobby, kind of peeking through the audience and anticipating all the set of physical reactions his audience is about to have. And he has a famous line, I think it's in the Hitchcock-Truffaut interview book, where he says to Truffaut, "I'm the conductor of an orchestra, the members of whom are the audience." This, to me, is the single greatest description of, what we do. And what I'd like to emphasize is that should be true on the page, not don't just leave that to the director. So what that means, though, if you really think about what he's saying there, is that the whole film is sheet music to create a set of effects and experiences in the hearts and minds and bodies of that audience. They're actually performing the movie for you. That's what Hitchcock's saying. They're the orchestra. He doesn't say they're the audience. He says they're the orchestra. They're actually making it happen. And so the jump scare becomes just one of this whole wonderful range of things that you can do. And the more you can decide that can be nailed on the page, regardless of the budget of the movie ultimately, the better off you're going to be.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I'd love to know what you guys think about all these horror films that are coming out at the moment based on true stories. I mean, I think it's fantastic. I think it scares people in advance. And I think a great example was The Strangers. That really scared me. So,
That movie's so fucking scary.
Yeah, and completely not
It is
based on
so
anything
scary.
true. That's a different genre. That's the movie where you put on the poster it's based on a true story, and of course it's not. But
And
Did
it should have
everybody
gotten
hear
an
the
Oscar
question?
nomination for sound design too.
Yeah,
That
no,
movie
very
was
good,
almost
very good.
entirely done with sound.
The question was basically like, what are your
like, do you think it's a great idea? Because it's just
Well, look, it goes to me. It's an extension of what I was saying before about realism, reality, right? The anything that says to the audience. And I think it probably was Jason.
we're talking
He's a
about stuff
genius.
based on true stories.
Yeah, who says, and they can even quantify the impact in your numbers, in your exhibition numbers, on whether there's a sentence on your poster that says it's based on a true story. So already, again, I would almost say that's doing something to the psychophysiology of the audience, that they're going into it being told it's true. Ooh. It just means much more, and it's equivalent though to visually what Paranormal did or what Blair Witch did. They didn't have to say it's true because the form of it says to you it's true.
And based on a true story, that phrase in and of itself is an intentionally vague phrase. I mean, that's a marketing phrase. And there's nowhere else in life where you say, based on a true story. That's a film marketing phrase, because what does that mean? I mean, every film is based on a story of some sort, I guess, For sure, 100%. Yeah, you're keying in on the the reason why that phrase exists. I mean, that's right. I mean, for sure. Yeah, that's the same reason why an urban legend functions in the way that it does. Your cousin's friend, that's who.
I swear to God, this happened to my aunt.
Yeah, and, but it's a great thing. It's a powerful part of horror filmmaking. It just has to be dealt with sort of delicately on the other side of things, which is if it's something that really is true and authentic, then that's the sort of extreme version where you have to deal with things a little bit more delicately. If it's
Barbara
Hershey's.
And it's based on a true story, which most people don't know. Absolutely.
Actually happened to Barbara Hershey, actually.
I also think the ultimate goal as a horror filmmaker is to make a film that stays with the audience after they leave the theater and after they realize the lights come up and they realize that they're safe. And so I think there's...
And they never turn their lights off.
And they never turn their lights off again. And I think, the based on a true story just hits that inherent fear, like, it happened to these people, and the strangers can totally show up and just like knock on my door and ask for Alice or whoever she was looking for. And I think that's, is it overused? And it's it's a way to make people feel unsafe in their own neighborhood. Yeah, totally. But it's that fast way to make a movie stick with you. I mean, like I just watched like the Poughkeepsie tapes, and
yes, the Dowdles.
Yes,
Love
I mean
that movie.
that movie is just like. they even do like that thing. It's so based on a true story that when this comes out in theaters, the serial killer could be sitting right next to you. It's so William Castle, and it's so like it seems very schlocky, but it's just like you check next to you. Like, have I seen this guy, and is he gonna creep up on me with a weird mask and shove a needle in my neck? So I think it's a way to just keep sticking the audience after the credits have rolled.
It speaks. I'm sorry.
I was just going to throw one of the paradox to that is interesting, is that it's also that we live in a funny time when lots of the tropes of the supernatural are more successful than ever before, but not necessarily because they're scary. So the ways in which, say, paranormal romance, whatever that means, has taken things like the vampire and the ghost and werewolves and things that used to be fundamentally fear-inducing things, and are using them, really, they're repurposing them for other things.
Twilight is terrifying. So.
But not necessarily for the reasons it thinks. But my point being, in an era like that, when kind of gothic supernatural tropes are actually kind of maybe comforting, in part because they are reassuring about the possibility of an afterlife or of a god
Warm
or
bodies.
all kinds of things, when reality is filled with these stories of here's a guy who kept a whole second family in a basement and yada, 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 or Newtown or whatever. So suddenly we also may be in a moment when things ripped from the back pages of a newspaper or from the parts of the local news you don't want to watch are actually more frightening than the traditional, especially supernatural elements that made up the genre.
It also speaks philosophically to, and I'm realizing now that every single answer we've all given all night long sort of supports this, which is it creates dread. And dread, there's a difference, we all have gotten metaphysical about, how dread and terror and horror are three different, very separate things. Terror is the jump scare. Dread is, this is based on a true story and you're going to shit your pants. It sets up a horrible, anticipation. And I think all of us probably would agree that the dread of anticipation is actually more frightening than the moment of. I've always, when I work with actors, I tell them, it's not the moment of. You're just going to go, wow, and you're going to have your reaction, and that's important, but it's the moment before when you realize you're fucked. It's horrible. And then the audience is going to reflect on that. And it's that anticipation of dread. And that's just a big version of, here's a headline to help you with that concept. This is going to be dreadful.
Cool. White shirt?
Earlier, the panel was talking about how the conventions of the genre were often a mirror of the anxieties of society in a post-Cold War era and throughout. And then this postmodernist spin that really became that self-referential dynamic of things like Scream and the like. And over the last number of years, first in the literary sense and now translated to film, there's been these interesting genre mashups. The Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, or the Abraham Lincoln, obviously both by the same guy. Is that a flash in the pan? Is that an interesting genre conceit that has legs and is some interesting dynamic for horror in general to explore? And I'd welcome anyone's perspective on it.
Seth Grahame-Smith would tell you that he wished it had even more legs than than it did. I don't know that. I think that's something that was really interesting for a period of time, and it was something that was there were multiple versions of those types of films and projects that were bought in a really short period of time. I think that they haven't necessarily sort of performed in a quite at the level that maybe some of the studios and distributors had thought that they would, to the degree that every movie would then turn out to be that way. Hasn't performed kind of in the way that I guess you would say, even kind of the found footage or cinema verite style has worked for a lot of different types of films. So, I think there will be more of them, but only kind of ones that are the cream of the crop. There won't be sort of cheap knockoff versions of that for much longer.
But also I think it goes to something that you said, Mickey, that I think is so key, which is we're referring to horror as a genre. And in a way, I would suggest it's actually not a genre, in the sense that by film genres, usually we mean a set of conventions that, really are quite constraining in terms of the subject matter, the location, a Western, or an Eastern, like a film noir, or a city movie, or a musical. I mean, these define pretty narrowly what it is. But horror, I would submit, actually doesn't. And Mickey sort of indicated that. You could put horror into any context. It really is I'm not even sure what there's, I'm sure in literary theory, some correct term for it, but there's some other term for it. So if you go back to someone like Aristotle, he's just talking about there's only two, right? It's either comedy or tragedy. And I would submit that horror is just tragedy. So that in the sense that we now exist in a moment when you could actually integrate, because of a lot of the forces, I think especially Mickey was talking about, the mainstreaming of horror, that you could go into any type of story, any historical period, any context, and bring the elements of horror, that it's going to scare people, that it's going to raise these issues of physical mortality and et cetera, and that is a really fruitful area, and I think we will see more of that. While at the same time, yes, the gimmick of just the mashup aspect of it, I think that's self-evident. But this idea of really understanding that, break out of this notion that, oh, it's just these little conventions of a haunted house or of this, and say, no, I could take any situation, any period in history, any famous circumstance, a fairy tale, anything, but decide to make it tragic, decide to make the stakes life or death, decide to not necessarily have a happy ending, decide to not reaffirm the meaning of things at the end, all the things that make it horror, is a brilliant way to go, and is a very fresh way to go now, and is something that's more possible now than maybe it was before.
So it's like a template, really. I mean, you can layer it, and that's what's cool. I think it's another way of saying what you said. Is you can take the clear plastic template of horror and put it on a comedy, and then you can take it and you put it on a romance, and you get, Let Me In. You can take it and you can layer it on a historical thing, and now you've got, any number of things. But it's a template that you can actually. You almost want to start by saying, do I want to write a drama or a comedy or a family story, and then you can layer horror onto any one of those templates or onto those formats.
Seth Grahame-Smith that you're referencing, with those projects is a terrifically talented writer in general, whether it's, novels or screenplays, and someone who, someone who I spent a little bit of time with in his early days before those movies got off the ground, and he knows horror inside and out. Absolutely loves the genre, if I'm allowed to call it a genre. Absolutely loves the genre and gets it, and is a fantastically talented writer. So for him, it's not so much a gimmick. It's just, what these guys are referencing, which is he just sort of took some of the conventions of it and put it into, a well-written screenplay or story.
Anybody else?
I have a personal question.
Whoa.
Because I'm very new to it. Like, obviously, it was like, here are the films, and they're like, we love both of them. And they took both. One's horror, one's not.
Get a lawyer.
Yeah.
I actually got them their lawyer later on.
Get another lawyer then. Get a lawyer that doesn't like him.
Yeah, exactly.
I would ask if you want to do it, if you want to work in this industry, if you want to work in film, because that's, I mean, you can.
I wanted to work in the acting aspect,
which is fantastic.
Yeah.
You can totally translate that. If you're excited and you have a story to tell, then go for it. But make sure you also treat it as its own job, and make sure you treat it with the same amount of professionalism you would treat acting or theater, as you were talking about, because it takes. For me, in my path so far, I didn't expect to be doing film necessarily, and that's all I've been doing for the past few years, and it's definitely like all-consuming right now, which I love. But it's a job, and you really have to make sure you work really hard at. Like, the hardest part for me has been persisting through the various setbacks that you might encounter or not, I guess. But it's just a game of like keeping on, as you have probably experienced in theaters. If you want to do it, make sure you treat it with that same amount of like diligence and respect and care.
And write for yourself. I mean, it sounds like I'm making a joke, but seriously, if that feels like that's one of your strengths, tie your two strengths together, and put parts in for yourself that it's like undeniable. Oh my God, he's a great writer. We got this thing, and we got to have the script, and you're the guy for the role. That kind of use it as a tool to maybe go back to your first love if this is in fact like a second love.
And the only other thing I'd throw into that is, I had a teacher who used to say, and turned out to be very true in my case, and may well turn out to be very true in your case, where he said, look, it's really going to take, 10 years to get to a certain point in terms of the quality of what you're doing, but also being able to survive. And don't make the mistake of thinking because you actually got wonderfully lucky and presumably wonderfully talented that something happened right away. The 10 years is still to come. Do you know what I mean? And it certainly happened to me. I got Corman movies, lots of early stuff. So my biggest advice would be, great, keep going, and don't be freaked out if 2 years from now or 3 years from now you're going, but wait, I already did this, and now I'm... Because you will still have to do a lot of that. And it's great. Just be happy that, in fact, you're already being able to vault right into a point where you can really do it, and expect to still suffer a whole lot while you're doing it, even though you've wonderfully got lucky and been talented to do it. And that's great.
A great example is Mickey and myself. No, it's true, though. Like, you have a movie, and it's coming out, and he still works at a regular job, or not a regular job, industry job, but still, he works all the time, I'm assuming.
Every single day.
That's right. And it's the same with me. Like, I thought I got really lucky at the beginning when my film, we had representation, and it was going really great. And that was a couple years ago, and I've been hustling every single day since, because it doesn't stop unless, if you stop, it's going to stop. Yeah.
It never gets, filmmaking is always inherently, 1,000 battles and feeling like the world's about to collapse upon you. It never gets easier. And it's just about the endurance of just sitting there through the, feeling like the incredible anxiety that comes with it, and just not stopping, because the people who typically, if the only person preventing you from continuing to do what you want to do is yourself. So, yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Or we should probably move on. Sorry. No offense. I'm just like
Okay, I just wanted to go to the bathroom, but don't worry about me.
My feet are killing me, so no complaints. What's your question, babe?
Hi, I actually did a different film school. This is another good one. I go to SC, and I'm finding that all my contemporaries, right, they're all in their 20s, and I find that this generation, the zeitgeist, is for this really choppy editing style, and it's something that I find really interesting, because I think it says something about the attention span of young people these days, like the MTV generation, commercials. Do you think that affects your writing in any way?
Well, to the extent, for me...
Did everybody hear the question? Okay, cool.
Well, I guess I would turn that bit on its head. I think we typically dismiss this upcoming generation, say it's because of short attention span. I actually don't think it's that at all. I think it's quite the contrary. It's because of an incredible ability to process information infinitely faster than I could, or than my dad could, or than my granddad could, because you have to. Because, in fact, the visual environment we live in happens at a faster rate. We know this is true historically. We know, hey, go back to, we're talking about 1896, right? The train coming in the station, right? Yeah. This famous first image, and this classic idea that people leapt out of the way. What's astonishing when you look at that film is how slow the train's moving. But you have to remember what a shock it would have been for human beings, go back even before that, when they're just walking or on a horse, and the difference it meant to move at this rate. So over time, the visual information in the real world, the rate of it has changed, and changed rapidly. What's astonishing to me, and I was really aware of this when my father was dying maybe 10, 15 years ago, and we'd go to the movies still together, which we've been doing since I was a little kid. And he was a very brilliant man and super smart, and I feel like I learned everything I know, about movies in many ways from him. And when I was a kid, I would always sit there and I'd have to ask him to explain to me often what was going on. Particularly because we'd walk into the movie in the middle, like they used to more in the old days, and then you'd stay and watch it again. But I noticed in the latter period, starting in the 90s, not because he had all lost it. He was a professor. I mean, it's no intellectual incapacity at all. But he would find himself sometimes asking me what was going on, because the rate of cutting, the nature of how scenes were being covered, and even the increasing nonlinearity or choppiness of the narrative was not corresponding to kind of the codes of information that he was used to. So I actually think it's totally liberating, and that, yes, it can be used to excuse a kind of Michael Bay style, spectacular but narratively incoherent and emotionally incoherent kind of... that's not a knock on Michael Bay, who's going to have me killed. I don't mean that. It's brilliant, whatever it is, but it's not what we're talking about. But there's another one which I feel totally inspired by the fact that you can be more nonlinear, you tell your story out of order, you can put funny gaps in, you can actually show oblique details rather than a master shot and a medium shot and a close shot, precisely because we've got a generation who are processing information at blinding speed, multitasking their little butts off, you know, and doing 50 things at once. So again, I'd rather not think of that as being the diminishment of that audience, but in fact something that's going to force us to raise our games to make more challenging narrative to fit this faster information processing that kids have now, I think.
And you can really frighten them by slowing things down. No,
true.
you can. You can. You can. When you slow something down, it can be really terrifying. So you can use this new information processing, which is exactly right.
There's a doorknob right behind you.
No, there's not. Tell me there's not. But when you take, you know, you have a 1.5-minute short film, say you're doing for YouTube or whatever, and you're just practicing a technique, like you're practicing a gag, you know, you can use that technique. But then when you slow it down, you have instantly, subconsciously told them, uh-oh, be afraid. You're creating dread. Dread is actually easier to create now than it probably ever was because of that.
And I think as a writer, it doesn't necessarily like motivate me to, you know, write a script that's like, you know, got 1,000 cuts per page, but really it motivates me to write intriguing plot, you know, and even character exchanges. Like, I mean, Quentin Tarantino, you know, everything about his writing is just delicious to absorb, and you know, he's got a very traditional 70s aesthetic of filmmaking, but you just sit there and you watch it transfixed. And I mean, Pulp Fiction came out during the MTV you know, like there were music videos and all that quick cutting, and I think in a generation where everyone is transfixed by everything else, it's the most important to captivate your audience through the story you're conveying, not through the 1,000 cuts and the hundreds of different camera angles you can take.
But look at Pulp Fiction, it's the perfect example, because in fact, you're so right, he doesn't do that formally, but the story is told all out of order.
Right, totally.
The dialogue is never delivering the plot. So it's actually relying on, in some sense, the same underpinnings as that kind of cutting does, and it's even more effective because he doesn't do the cutting. He actually does that to the world.
I think it's really something that's referencing. It's not so much about the editing style at all. I think that's just how your brain sort of processes what it is that you think is going on. You know, people have been talking about the MTV generation for. I mean, 25 years at this point in time. People have been talking about the MTV generation's attention span. So 25 years later, after we've started saying that, you know, audiences are significantly more sophisticated, and you know, and the example of your father, I mean, that's a good one. You know, where at some point in time, the sort of narrative structure changes a little bit, and it's different from the movies that they grew up watching. So, you know, to me, what that speaks to more so than anything else is that you have to be making telling interesting stories out there in the world. It's not about the editing style or sort of quick cuts or anything of that nature. You have to be able to keep your audience interested, because there's 1,000 other choices that they have out there, you know, that maybe didn't exist a generation ago.
And even a movie like Cabin Fever is a great example, because that movie moves at a snail's pace when you watch it. I mean, the sick guy doesn't really show up until about 30 minutes into the film, but it's so intriguing and it's so, you know, funny but weird and bizarre that you just transfixed by it. I mean, and that movie came out when there were where every single horror film was directed by a music video director trying to break into the film industry. And, you know, it goes to prove that with a great script and really cool characters that you just like to hang out with, that's arguably probably way more important than, you know, the fear of short attention spans.
There's actually a pretty interesting question from Twitter from the Orlando Jones. Is this really Orlando Jones? That's cool.
Is the Orlando Jones?
It doesn't say verified, but I don't know. It's talk about the foreign marketplace. Like, do you guys have any thoughts on? Obviously, horror is very international, opposed to like a comedy, which isn't. It like doesn't sell foreign very well. Do you guys have any thoughts on the marketplace now, internationally, foreign, anything?
Fucking awesome.
I guess it's like, are you talking about selling your film, or are you talking about?
Specifically, the question says, talk about the foreign marketplace in terms of your projects. Are there financing, co-production, and distribution opportunities overseas? I mean, I think that, I don't know if they want to talk about their project specifically. Might be a conflict, might not. I don't know.
Yes.
Uwe Boll gets money foreign.
I mean, you're talking an industry thing, and you can probably speak to it more than we can, but I mean, there's all sorts of different things that go into selling a film in a foreign market. They they have their own culture and their own likes, and celebrities they respond to differently than how we respond to. But when you're making your movie, like I said earlier, you should definitely pay attention to the key things like who wants to see your movie. And if one thing that does translate is a German person who likes horror movies is still going to like horror movies. Right. It doesn't really matter. If it's a good movie in that genre, then they're going to like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely important for the horror genre. It's you know, like Kaylee just mentioned, things like comedy, you know, don't necessarily work or translate that well to most foreign markets, but horror traditionally, universally translates. So it's the way that a lot of the films are being put together now, and scary is scary, you know. So if you craft things the right way, you know, and talking earlier about some of the jump scares or, you know, inherently the things that are built into it, building that sense of dread that's not just based on a line of dialogue that may or may not translate, but those frightening visuals, you know, I guarantee you could watch The Shining with the sound off and still be frightened by, you know, sort of what you're seeing on screen. So it's hugely important, you know. I would say focusing on the sort of telling the best story, creating the best film, you know, that you're going to, then from there, the marketplace will dictate what the best way is to go sell it, whether that's foreign or, you know, international pre-sales or whatever that might be.
And it's true, because those markets are, you know, they go through little cycles. I'll give you a quick anecdote that'll illustrate that. During the process of Haunting Connecticut, many drafts into it, or knew it was going to be made, you know, dealing with the company that's making it. The head of that company, it was Gold Circle, went to Cannes, and the script was basically done, and we had written it to be, I think it was a $10 million projected budget. And it was at a moment right after the failure of the fake saws, the non-saw saws, and the non-torture porn. So suddenly, we got these panicked calls from Cannes, in effect saying, well, actually the market for horror turned out to be way softer than we thought it was going to be. You know, and they wanted to know two things. One, you know, how could they present, how could they verbally talk about the film to their potential buyers in ways that wouldn't emphasize at that particular moment the horror, because even though the kind of horror people were reacting against had nothing to do with this movie, there was still a sense that there might be a bit of a backlash. More significantly, though, what he came back saying was, okay, so we're not going to be able to sell it for quite as much. So in fact, we want to cut $2 million out of the budget. Can you cut $2 million out of the script to make that easier to do, which then we did. It's always better to take that money out of the script than when you're, you know, trying to shoot it later. The only other thing I would say is, to me, what's really exciting right now is we're in one of these rare periods when horror is working beautifully internationally.
Microphone, sorry.
Not our horror movies, but their movies coming to us. You know, because there's only been a few decades where we really got to get the rest of the world's vision of horror. And that's why it was so incredibly inspiring that there's waves of Japanese and Korean films that we got, and now the Spanish films and the French films and all these others. And I would really urge, especially you guys and whoever is out there in internet land looking at this, if you're Americans, and if you've stayed fairly narrowly within American horror films, to really get out there and check out these international ones, because that's a way to really freshen up your own sense of what this genre can do, because there are people, I think, in other countries following different rules and breaking all the boxes that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, the French are now
martyrs.
Just the angriest, scariest filmmakers in the world.
Inside.
And I'm in utter awe at the films that they put out.
Did you see Martyrs?
I love Martyrs. I think that's a fantastic. Frontiers is another great one. I saw a movie called Calvaire, which is horrifying. And even Gaspar Noé, his movies are fantastic. And I totally agree. If you are limited yourself strictly to American horror films, watch the French and watch the Japanese, because I guarantee you, and the Koreans especially, you will lose sleep.
It's funny because I feel like you're right. Definitely, I think that's the more interesting thing now is like anything, you know, Ringu, Ju-on, the Eye, like there's so many. I mean, and something like a Martyrs, like, you know, our friend's trying to remake it, and I don't know if it'll translate, but you kind of turn it on its head. But I feel like it's one of those things where there is so much great stuff internationally, and also a lot of people don't know. If you look into the directors, like The Possession being a really great example, the director is Ole Bordenau, and he is, I think, not Belgium, he's Danish, and his film that I first saw was Vicarin, The Substitute, and I was like, holy crap. And I think that they're still trying to remake it, but he got this movie off of that. Or like Tommy Wirkola, who did Dead Snow, and then he did Hansel and Gretel. So it's like all these people that are kind of transitioning. Some of them don't even speak English, you know? So it's like director Kim just did The Last Stand. He's done oodles of horror, Bittersweet Life, Good, the Bad, and the Weird, like I Saw the Devil, Tale of Two Sisters, which became The Uninvited. You know, it's like he's now doing a film, and he can barely speak English, but he is that good of a filmmaker that he did a big Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. So that's the interesting part about it, I think. And my first internship was at Oslo Pictures, which did, you know, Taka Chise was the producer on Ringu and Ju-on and Dark Water and all this, and then on the remakes. And it's so interesting just to see, like, you know, you watch Ju-on and you're like, I'm scared still. And then you watch your remake, you're like, I'm scared. So that's the interesting part, I think. And also the fact that you don't actually have to have A-list actors is also great because, and it's also interesting too, because it's like, it can be popular in the US and then internationally they kind of, most of the time get stuff way after us. Like maybe it's a week, maybe it's a year. And so then it becomes popular there and then it becomes popular here again. So it's actually great for filmmakers, I'd say. What do you think? One more question? Anybody else have one? Go ahead. Sorry.
I'd actually like to know a bit more maybe about your process when it comes to writing for genre, and to what extent you start thinking about marketing the story early or later, and to what extent you feel the pressure of genre when you're getting feedback, notes on your script, and how you deal with that with your intermediate process.
Yeah, so this is a question essentially for, I guess, a writer or a director, kind of what their process is and how they take feedback.
I mean, I think working in any studio system, you have to do the former ladder. The one where you have to like realize it's a collaboration. There are always going to be notes. There's going to be 50 people with ideas, and it's your job as a professional writer to incorporate those ideas. And you can find your line. You have to say, this is not what I wanted to do anymore, and that's when you walk away. But as far as my process goes, again, just start with what scares you. I really think with Sunflower, the idea of Stockholm Syndrome really just kept eating away with me. I was like, how do you be a victim and turn to sort of understand and sympathize with the aggressor? That was really fascinating to me. So that is really where it started, and I just let it sit around and marinate. And actually, the funny thing is that I was playing Wii tennis with my sister, and we were really competitive. We're like a year apart, and we were really getting into it, and I accidentally hit her in the face with the racket, and I was like, oh my God, 2 girls trapped in a house, competing against each other to stay alive against a serial killer. And she was like, that's fucked up. And I was like, there you go. And so I think that's part of it too. It's like when you are talking with your friends and stuff about your ideas, and they're like, wow, that's crazy, then you start to realize that's marketing. What you're doing right there is you're finding out how they're responding and how they love your idea, and then you know you've got something good that's worth sitting down and really hashing out, and going over how to get scared with that idea even more. So,
I mean, there are a couple of things there to jump. I mean, I think that's brilliant, and that's exactly right. There's sort of two different things you're putting together there. One, how do you, when you're sitting down to do something, deal with sort of the weight of the genre? Is that useful or is that oppressive? Versus this process of having to work through and with other people, particularly in a studio context, but even not in a studio context where you're having to take notes. So in terms of the first one, to me, I really embrace that. Again, Haunting Connecticut's not the greatest movie ever made by any means. It's not great, but it's an effective haunted house movie. There's a case where, okay, it's a very traditional genre. It's a very strict genre. It's sort of like saying, okay, I've actually been hired to make a blues song. So you're not, there are certain chord progressions you have to use, or it's not the blues. So there are certain things that are either there or not there, or it's not a haunted house story. And you can either find that oppressive or not. The fun to me in a case like that is the little variations on the classic architecture of that then give you a lot of variation. So we really particularly will love a particular blues musician for the little change they did, not because they reinvented the wheel, okay? And I will almost always start with pretty strict genre models. am still to this day, will watch movies that I admire and outline them while I'm watching them to get a sense of their structure. I really believe internalizing the structures of every kind of movie you like and really being aware of those structures. I like to feel like I have all those structures at my disposal, and then I can even literally lay them down on a page as like a ice cube tray and start playing with filling them in, and then because I have utter faith that I will change it and I will make it different and I'll make it individual, and I feel like it gives me a little boost just into the weirder parts if I can start with a structure that just avoids the true horror of the blank page. And just quickly on the other one of how do you dealing with the notes, to me it's really a pretty, I mean, I really agree with you that you have to have a limit. You have to have a point which you know you've done enough. You got to know at that point you don't get to probably take your show with you, but you could step away and keep your dignity or whatever, and hopefully your credit. My definition of that moment in a studio context is the first time they suggest to you to try something that you actually already did 3 drafts ago, and we all went past that, and they no longer even remember that. That's the point at which I say, okay, I'm done. But in general, my process with that, always with a note, is to start with the assumption that they're correct, that there is something in the place of the script that they're looking at that is not working. And I equally, though, give myself the privilege of assuming that their answer is probably wrong, but that their question is right, and that they deserve respect for identifying it rather than you being defensive about that.
Yeah, I think for me, this has always helped me, and maybe you'll find this helpful, but a skill that I always worked on for myself was making sure I translated. It's my job to translate what their note is, because everyone has notes, and it's your job as a professional to translate that note into something productive. The amount of terrible inaction ideas I've heard is astounding. It makes you like, it makes your skin crawl. You're like, did you even see the movie? Like, what's happening? But like, it's just mind-blowing sometimes. That being said, every single time you're able to find what the actual problem is, and that just takes a little bit of investigation. Okay, you think this is a good idea to solve. Okay, you think that right in this area of the movie there's something lacking. There's some tension between these two characters that should be boosted up. Now you figure out a way to create that tension in the confines of the story that you want to make, but you have to play that game and be willing to translate what it is they're trying to tell you, because they don't know how to say it necessarily. They're not in your head.
Yeah, I think this is just from, I haven't been hired to direct a $5 million horror film for a studio, but I think just as an independent filmmaker, it's important to set your sights, going back to what I said at the very beginning, set your sights on what seems to be achievable. So, I mean, like for Ritual, I watched a whole bunch of first films by directors that I admire. So I watched Blood Simple, I watched The Roost by Ty West, I watched Rogue River, which I think is a fantastic movie, and Hard Eight by Paul Thomas Anderson. And just through that, I tried to, I didn't want to make, Rosemary's Baby right off the top. I wanted to make a movie that was comparable, because at least then I'd have some sort of sight to aim at when, if it worked for these movies, it could work for my movie. But the other important thing is, I think it's really essential when you've completed a film to show it to like audiences who have no idea and no context you have no idea what it's about. I mean, and it's terrifying when you show an assembly cut to somebody who, whose job it is to try to, market your movie, or like it works at an agency. You're gonna hear a lot of things. Well, it's not like The Stranger, so you should cut it accordingly. And yeah, I mean, is your movie never gonna be like The Stranger? Ever gonna be like The Stranger? Probably not. But it helps, look at it and realize where it could be, where the tension and where the stakes could be heightened, where it could, be trimmed down and more concise, and then once you make that cut, show it to more people, and then show it to, even more people. Because I think test audiences won't bullshit you, and nothing is more uncomfortable than sitting in a crowd of 40 people and just like knowing and hearing them cough and knowing where your movie's slow. That's horrifying. So yes, that would be my advice.
I think that as well. Again, these are great. I'm learning something too. Thank you guys. It's don't forget watching a horror film is an almost entirely emotional experience. It's all about empathy, relating the dread, putting yourself in there, and at the writing point, you have to really be careful to keep that as like the spine. Keep that empathy with those characters in place as you're doing it, because at the end of the day, you're essentially taking an emotional experience, which is the final, and if you're deconstructing it backwards, and you're re-engineering it in a cerebral way. So it's like you get a vase, and now you have to break it into 1,000 pieces and glue it together to make the vase again. You know what I mean? Because you saw the vase, now you have to recreate it for everybody. And I think being in touch with, 99.99999% of people wake up in the morning after a horrible nightmare and they put it away, and the rest of them it's us. And I think that you have to keep that part of your personal fear really in check, and you have to make that the spine so that they can relate to you as a person. Because at the end of the day, this is an art about personal expression, and horror in particular is incredibly emotional for an audience. And if they can relate to you, and they can relate to your experience, and you can relate it to them, you build that vase again. Intellectually build an emotional experience, which sounds really weird. That's, I think, the foundation of constructing a horror script.
It's also really important to get the atmosphere on the page. I think from what I've learned about reading scripts and what I hear people talk about, it's like they're like, I just kept turning the page and I was scared. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning, but I just kept going, and then I couldn't turn off my lights. And I think that a lot of people lose that a little when you're writing, is that you're trying to create experience for the reader. And if you can create that experience for the reader, that movie will get made, because a director will read it and go, I know what this feels like. I know what this is. A producer will read it and go, oh my God, I see it. So I think it's really important to create that atmosphere on the page that you're feeling inside, and really making sure, even in tricks of like one line, a thing, and waiting, when you get to the bottom of the page, make sure the bottom of the page is the action description that makes you want to be like, wait, what's happening next? So you go to the next page, So like if someone's about to die, put like, and that person, ... turn the page, dies. It really does make you turn the page. It's crazy how simple those tricks work.
That's
too.
a nasty little trick.
One of the most important things I think that was set up here tonight was talking about the idea that someone might not know what the solution is, but they're asking the right question, so accord them that respect. If they're bumping up against something in that screenplay, they might not know how to say it to you properly, and I'm speaking from the producer or manager perspective. Sometimes I have clients that I have long-term relationships with that I say to them, I don't know what the solution is, I don't know what the answer is, but this doesn't work right here. So let's figure it out together, whatever that might be. I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you that there's something that doesn't work here. So especially in the beginning, it's important to figure out how to collaborate with other people around you, whether or not you think that they, have all the answers or not. They're not trying to do your job, but they are trying to make a better product in the long run, and hopefully the process gets it there.
I actually fully agree, especially since we do like the same thing for a living. But I will literally, for client notes, just put page 33. This scene is not working for me. Let's discuss. And I always feel that in a conversation, things will come out, and then my client will understand, or I'll understand, or be able to crack the scene. And even more importantly, everybody does have notes, and everybody has opinion, and all the time it isn't coming from the right place. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's important to think of why somebody's saying something opposed to what they're actually saying. If they say they don't like a character, maybe it's because the scenes they're in aren't working. Maybe it's because they just need that character modified, or everyone around them modified. You just never know. If the ending isn't working, it's because the beginning isn't working. It's just thinking about why somebody says something. And also, don't address every note somebody has. I find that people are like, well, so-and-so said this, and so-and-so's produced 4 movies. And I'm like, well, so-and-so's not involved, and I don't really care what they think sometimes, because it's like, just stay true to your art and listen to what people say, but don't change it just because someone says it. Think about what they say, and then think if you really need to change it and if it will really benefit the script.
And to that idea, I think that you will get less notes if you own the page. If you're very sure with what you're doing, if you've thought it out, if you've got everything, when there's a question to come, you say, here's the answer. This is okay in this scene. We need to go back and build that up a little more for you if you didn't see it. I think that that's something really important that I don't think people tell people enough, is to own the page.
It's true. If you have an answer, then most times the note kind of goes away. If they have a note and you go, cool, here's the reason I'm doing this particular thing, there probably is something wrong with the execution because they didn't get it. But at least you know what your intent was. And on the flip side, though, I'm sure we've all experienced this. Sometimes notes are bullshit.
Yeah. Sometimes people give you notes just to give you notes.
My God, because they want to be
they're
involved.
execs and that's what they get paid to do. It's not their fault.
Or they want to make a different movie.
Like
one time I was talking about a film that was a very contained, thrillery political film. And this guy was like, awesome, great, can you put it on Mars? And
yes.
And then I realized that, my writing partner at the time was like in the middle of talking, and he just stopped and went wide-eyed and did not know what to say because it was so ludicrous.
And you
get to make our movie.
You get a lot of, I feel like in the studio, you get a lot of why. Why is this happening? Why? And, and it's a thing I like to tell execs. I'm like, Dracula and vampires and all of that stuff didn't exist until Bram Stoker made it up. That's the lexicon now. It's like Harry Potter was invented by a woman who in England, and now there's, amusement parks and stuff. It's like sometimes the answer is, why are you doing this specific thing? It's like, it's cool. Why can't we do that specific thing?
Well, why is a very destructive word in horror. Go watch any Kubrick film and see how many whys you walk away with. And we're worshiping him at LACMA right now. Because he said, fuck you, I'm not telling you why, you figure out why. Chris Nolan does the same thing.
Do whatever you want. That's
let them catch up to you. Let them be, part. That's not to say that, that's your answer to all your notes, because this is all very appropriate. You'll have a very short career.
Every studio exec just
I'm a genius, you don't have to know why. No, it's not about that. It's knowing when to pick your battles on the, because sometimes, and this is horror specifically, sometimes the uncanny and the unanswerable is better. Jack Torrance in that photo. I don't know why, Why is Lloyd visible? It's like there's so many. Who unlocked that freezer door to let him out?
That is so critical, and I have to say, if there is a fight that I've had most frequently, and again we'll bring Jason up because I say he's one of the few executives I ever encountered on that side of the line who got right away that part of horror is unknowability. What is the single scariest thing to us other than potentially death, and why is death the scariest thing? Because we don't know what it is. Yeah. Because we can't experience it until it's too late. So to have too many answers is going to screw you. But let me just throw one other thing out that's part of at least how I rationalize being quite open to notes and to getting lots of feedback. My wife is a novelist. I think she's a fantastic novelist. She's a literary novelist and a published one. And it leads us to talk and think a lot about the difference between what she does and what I do. And even though movies today, in ways they never were before, are consumed as if they were books, that is, by people alone. In their very nature, they're not intended to be consumed that way. They're a collective object that was constructed to be absorbed in a collective, like we're sitting in now. Whereas a book was not designed for that, right? And you might read a book out loud, but it's an individual experience in which you get to stick a straw into one other person's brain and in effect, suck directly. Brain to brain, one to one. I actually think it's important that film and television, regardless of whether you watch it alone or physically in a group, are not a one-to-one, but a kind of group-to-group thing. They express more collective ideas, more archetypal ideas. They move us in that way. They're often sometimes stupider because of that, or simpler, or go to a more common denominator, possibly. But they also can achieve things on a collective level, emotionally. So what that means is don't just rely on you and your brain, because it's then going to go into somebody else's brain. Or if that's how you feel, be a poet or a novelist. And you'll still find that editors will want to change that. But if you want to be in this medium or in television, which are fundamentally collective mediums, where you are in a privileged position to attempt to create pieces of our collective architecture and effect, then don't be too personal about it. I mean, be personal, care and love it, but also be able to depersonalize a little bit. Know that you don't really own. I mean, yeah, I love the idea of owning the page, but also know you don't own the page because you didn't really create it. Somebody did it before. The idea is collective. It comes through you. Whatever, however you want to think about it. And therefore, don't react so personally. Because I think probably for most of us, the hard thing is just in the moment not to take it personally.
It is so easy for us to tell you that.
I know, because in the end, how do you... But I have to sit there every time and go and remind myself that this is about this thing between us that we're doing together. It isn't personal.
Do you feel like maybe it's putting on two different hats?
In what sense? What do you mean?
When you think about the collective and the responses and the feedback and how this whole group wants your script to be versus how you would really want it to be.
Well, I mean, yes and no, because I also believe, I trust that if I've got a good imagination, and I don't think I'd be able to, you can't succeed for 5 seconds in this world without a good imagination. What does that actually mean? I think that means you were lucky enough to get kind of a piece of everybody's brain in your brain. So that, in fact, when you're trusting yourself individually, it's because you are having a collective response there, too. So, yeah, you're always having to balance that and trust that there's a reason why you're doing it, and it's not that, someone else sitting there doing it. But at the same time, like I said, I still depersonalize that and have I don't know, I have a kind of sense maybe like the Greeks did, that I didn't really make that up. It kind of came through me. Do you know what I mean? And that if I was lucky that I was in the right state, or I had read the right things, or thought the right things, or felt the right things to have that idea at that moment, that doesn't actually mean I own that it's mine in a way. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I also don't get that freaked out if it turns out that, gee, at that same moment across town, somebody else was writing the same script, and I didn't even know it. And it isn't because they stole it; it's because the spirit was coming through them at the same moment.
Zeitgeist. Yeah, one of the best things you can do if you have this luxury is you write your script. You put it in a drawer or show it to other people. If you can put it in a drawer, that's actually a really good tool. 6 months, come back and read it. Suddenly you are these people asking those questions. And you can be, a cold script is a really good approach. Like, sometimes in my experience, I've written scripts, decided something's not right here, so I'm not going to show it yet. I'll come back in a year or 6 months. I'm like, oh, wow, it's so easy now because I'm not emotionally involved. It's not fresh in my brain. It's had time to cool and sit. I've had other life experiences. And I'm also writing a new thing now, so that's not precious anymore. So if you can remove the preciousness with some time, that's a huge tool for a writer.
Be fun to work with. Yeah. Don't be a fucking pain in the
please.
ass. I mean...
And don't be super weird either.
True.
I'm not letting that fly anymore. We have to put you in rooms, and if you're creepy, you're not getting a job. You're just not.
If you're creepy and defensive about your screenplay when you're sent into the room, yeah, you're not. That person isn't. Life's short, and it's really fucking hard to make movies. So, are they going to want to sit through 80 hours of development meetings with you when you're super defensive about what that character's name is? No, they're just going to move on to the next thing because you're a pain in the ass.
On the same token, if you want to make your script the way you want, don't jump in a room with someone who wants to make a different movie. Go wait until you find the person that you want to make who wants to make that version of the thing.
Well, also, this is a business. I mean, I think it's just this dichotomy, especially because I work on the business side. It's like I'm sitting there and I can come up with an idea and my client can write it for me, and that's awesome and that's beautiful. And I'm not a screenwriter. Screenwriting is extremely difficult, and I have no urge to do it. I have the utmost respect for it, and I'm glad that I get to be as collaborative as I do with writers and directors, and that's like a really special thing for me, and that's why I'm a manager. That being said, it's a business at the end of the day. If I give my client a note, they do it. Why? Because I'm going to be the one pitching their script. If I don't like your script, I can't sell it. I can't sell something I don't like, and I can sell anything. So it's like, I'm just kidding, guys, but seriously, whatever.
That's the two hats you're talking about. One hat is being an artist and keeping your own personal integrity in about your art, and the other hat, at the same time, is selling your art if you want to sell it. If you don't want to sell it, cool. Just put it in the drawer and leave it there. But if you really want to sell it, keep in mind you're going to get notes. You can't make a movie by yourself. Or rather, you can, but it's extremely difficult, and it might take a really long time. So wear both hats and know that you have to do them both.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we've run out of time. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you guys for coming.
Guys.
Thank you.
John?
And thank you, Kaylee Marsh. Before we disband, just for the benefit of our audience out on the internet, which has been really exciting, we've had a fantastic response. All kinds of people retweeting quotes. I think Misha Green is like a new star on Twitter for something she said. Well, so everyone, is probably going to want to get Twitter if you don't have it.
And Orlando Jones is a fan now, apparently.
He is, the Orlando Jones, and it is verified. He responded. But can we just go down the line? If you don't have Twitter, that's okay, but you should. Say your Twitter handle.
Drew Daywalt, at Drew Daywalt.
Okay, into the microphone so that the
Twitter.
people can hear it.
He's just creating a Twitter.
At Drew Daywalt.
I think mine is the Tom Hagen, which is funny that the Orlando Jones, because my name's not Tom Hagen, but the Tom Hagen, I think.
Not on Twitter.
Awesome. Mickey Keating.
Mine's my film, and it's Absence Film.
Fantastic. And Kaylee Marsh is at Kaylee Marsh.
Make sure those are on the Screencraft Twitter
We will, yeah. I think we might have already tweeted it if we haven't already. Our awesome social media master up there, Ermin Barati, is on it as we speak. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. Also, you can follow Screencraft. It's at Screencrafting. Thank you for coming out, and we look forward to seeing you at other events. And
Thanks,
thank you to our
everybody.
panelists.
Oh, that was you? Yeah. Yes, a few times. Great meeting. Yeah.